lonely rancher thought his dog was gone, but it returned leading a lost Apache whip. John Walker lived a quiet and simple life on his ranch, a stretch of land so wide that it seemed to touch the horizon in every direction. The Arizona sun beat down on the dry soil, and the wind whispered through the tall grasses and scattered cacti. It was a beautiful yet lonely place. John had inherited the ranch from his father, who had taught him everything about caring for the land and animals. Since his father had passed away, the ranch had become his entire world. Years ago, John had lost his wife, Margaret. Her passing had left a hole in his life that nothing could fill. He remembered her smile, the sound of her laughter, and how she would stand by the fence and watch the cattle with him. After she was gone, the ranch felt emptier, colder, and the quiet settled in like a shadow. Friends and neighbors had their own lives, and though they would visit occasionally, John's life remained largely solitary. His only constant companion was Scout, a golden retriever with fur as bright as the desert sun. Scout had been with John for many years, ever since he was a playful puppy. Over time, Scout became more than just a dog. He was a friend, a protector, and a source of joy. John often joked that Scout understood more than some people he knew. Every morning, Scout would wait at the door, tail wagging, ready to follow John through his daily routines. The bond they shared was strong, a silent understanding that made the ranch feel less lonely. Life on the ranch followed a predictable rhythm. John would wake early each morning before the sun fully rose and step outside to feel the cool air of dawn. He would check the fences, making sure none had broken overnight. The cattle needed attention, and the land always required care. John had learned to read the skies, to know when rain was coming, and to understand the moods of his animals. Scout would trot alongside him, sometimes darting after a rabbit or chasing a fluttering bird, but always returning to John's side. Evenings were different. The desert sky transformed into a palette of oranges, pinks, and purples. John would sit on the porch, a cup of coffee in his hand, and watch the sun sink behind the mountains. Scout would curl up at his feet, head resting on his lap. In those moments, John felt a deep sense of peace. There was no rush, no noise of a busy town, just the quiet companionship of his dog and the soft sounds of the desert. One morning, everything changed. John woke to an unusual silence. Scout was not at his feet, not greeting him with his usual enthusiastic bark. At first, John thought Scout had simply wandered off to explore a familiar spot. But as the minutes passed, worry began to creep into his chest. He called Scout's name, his voice echoing across the empty fields. "Scout, here, boy," the words seemed swallowed by the wind. John's heart pounded. He stepped outside and scanned the land. There were paw prints, faint in the dust, leading away from the house, but they vanished quickly into the open plains. John's stomach sank. He had faced many challenges on the ranch, from storms to broken equipment, but the thought of losing Scout was unbearable. He couldn't imagine going through another day without his loyal companion by his side. For hours, John searched. He walked the fields, climbed over fences, and called Scout's name until his voice grew hoarse. The sun climbed higher in the sky, beating down on his back, but he refused to stop. His mind raced with terrible possibilities. Had Scout been attacked by a wild animal? Had he wandered too far and gotten lost? The desert was vast and unforgiving, and the thought of Scout alone in it filled John with dread. As the day wore on, John's search extended beyond his property. He knew the terrain well, but he also knew the desert held dangers he could not always control. Heat, rough terrain, and wildlife made it easy for even a clever dog to get into trouble. John thought about all the adventures he and Scout had shared, running through fields, playing fetch, exploring hidden corners of the ranch. He had always felt safe with Scout by his side, and now the roles were reversed. John had to find him before nightfall. Even as fear gnawed at him, John tried to stay calm. He knew panic wouldn't help. He retraced familiar trails, checked old water sources, and called out in the hope that Scout would hear him. Hours passed, and the desert heat became intense. Sweat soaked his shirt, and the dust clung to his skin. Still he pressed on, driven by love and the bond he shared with his dog. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with streaks of red and gold, John's hope began to waver. He sat down on a rock, exhausted, and tried to think clearly. He remembered the time Scout had gotten lost as a puppy, but had found his way home after a long, tiring journey. Maybe Scout was just doing the same thing now, following some instinct that John could not understand. The thought gave him a small spark of hope. The first night without Scout was the hardest. John slept fitfully, waking to check the horizon, hoping to see a familiar golden shape bounding toward him. The ranch felt emptier than ever, every shadow and sound a reminder of his companion's absence. He missed the warmth of Scout's presence, the comfort of knowing he was not truly alone. But deep down, John refused to give up. He had faced many hardships before, and he would face this one too. Scout was clever and loyal, and John believed that somehow they would be reunited. The following morning, John rose before dawn again, determined to continue the search. He walked the fields once more, scanning every inch of the land. He called out for Scout until his throat ached, listening for even the faintest response. The wind carried his voice across the plains, mixing with the calls of birds and the rustle of dry grasses. Every sound made his heart leap, only to sink when there was no response. Despite the worry, John remembered the lessons his father had taught him about perseverance and patience. He thought about the many challenges the ranch had thrown at him over the years: storms, broken fences, and lost cattle, and how he had always found a way to overcome them. This was no different. He would find Scout. He had to. As he walked, he thought about the bond he shared with Scout. It was more than friendship. It was a partnership built on trust, loyalty, and shared experiences. Scout had been there in good times and bad, and John knew the dog's instincts and intelligence were unmatched. Somewhere out there, Scout was navigating the desert, relying on the same skills that had always kept him safe. The morning light began to warm the land, casting long shadows and highlighting the contours of the hills and valleys. John moved carefully, following tracks and listening intently. Every rock, every shrub, and every sound became part of the search. He remembered Scout's playful nature, how he would bound through fields with joy, yet always return when called. That memory gave John strength. By mid-morning, John had covered miles of land, but Scout was still nowhere to be seen. He stopped near a small creek to rest and drink. The cool water refreshed him, and he allowed himself a moment to think. The desert could be unforgiving, but it also had its quiet beauty. The golden grasses swayed in the breeze, birds sang in the distance, and the sun glinted off distant mountains. In this vastness, John felt small, but he also felt determined. He would not stop until Scout was back by his side. As the day progressed, John continued his search, his determination unwavering. He called out Scout's name again and again, hoping that his loyal companion would hear him. Every passing hour without Scout made his heart ache, but he refused to lose hope. He remembered all the times Scout had guided him, protected him, and brought joy to his life. Now it was his turn to find Scout and bring him home. As night approached, John felt the first twinges of despair creeping in. The desert was changing with the setting sun, the shadows growing longer, the temperature dropping. But he refused to give up. He sat on a rock, listening to the sounds of the desert, feeling the wind on his face and thinking about Scout. Somewhere out there, his loyal companion was searching too, guided by instincts and the bond they shared. John promised himself that no matter how long it took, no matter how difficult the journey, he would find Scout. He had faced loneliness before, but he had never been without his faithful friend. The thought of being reunited with Scout kept him going, gave him courage, and filled him with hope that even in the vastness of the desert, he would not be truly alone. John Walker had searched tirelessly for Scout, but as the day wore on, it became clear that the golden retriever was not anywhere near the ranch. The vast desert stretched endlessly, each dune, hill, and rocky outcrop blending together in the afternoon haze. The heat was intense, and the dry wind carried dust and sand that made it difficult to see far. John wiped the sweat from his brow and took a deep breath, refusing to let discouragement take over. Scout was clever, and John knew his dog could survive even in harsh conditions, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. John decided to follow the faint paw prints he had noticed earlier. They were small, but they gave him hope. He carefully studied each print, trying to read the direction, the speed, and the energy Scout had put into moving forward. The tracks led away from the ranch and into the more rugged parts of the desert. Each step John took was cautious, mindful of the uneven terrain and the loose rocks underfoot. He knew one wrong step could cause injury, and in this search, he could not afford to falter. As John walked, he called Scout's name over and over, his voice echoing through the empty desert. The wind carried it away, but John did not stop. He knew Scout had a keen sense of hearing, and he hoped that somehow his dog would recognize the familiar call. He thought about all the adventures they had shared together, the countless times Scout had run through the fields chasing rabbits, the joyful leaps into streams during summer, the way he would curl up next to John on cold nights. Each memory strengthened John's resolve. He would not give up. Hours passed and the sun began to shift in the sky, casting longer shadows across the land. The desert was unforgiving. There was little shade and the heat reflected off the rocks and sand. John stopped near a cluster of boulders to rest and drink from his canteen. He examined the tracks carefully again, tracing Scout's movements. The paw prints led to an area where the desert was more rugged, filled with small cliffs, shrubs, and sparse vegetation. It was not a place anyone would wander casually, and John realized that Scout might have been drawn here by something unusual. As he moved forward, John noticed subtle signs that indicated life in the desert. A disturbed patch of sand, a bird flying off from a hidden perch, and broken twigs all suggested that someone or something had passed through recently. John's heart raced. Could Scout have encountered someone in need? Or had he simply wandered deeper into the wilderness, following his natural instincts? The possibilities filled John with both hope and anxiety. The terrain became more challenging. John had to climb over rocks, carefully stepping to avoid slipping. His legs ached, and the sun was high overhead, but he pressed on. He thought about the bond he shared with Scout, the unspoken understanding, the trust that had been built over years. He remembered the time Scout had found a lost calf and led it back to the pen, saving it from danger. Scout's intelligence and loyalty had always amazed him, and John believed that those same qualities would guide his dog now. By mid-afternoon, John reached a small valley surrounded by rocky outcrops. The temperature here was slightly cooler, thanks to the shade from the rocks, but the desert was still harsh. He paused and scanned the area carefully. His eyes darted from one rock formation to another, searching for any sign of movement. The silence was intense, broken only by the distant calls of birds and the rustle of dry grass. John's pulse quickened with each passing moment. Suddenly he noticed a faint movement near a cluster of shrubs. John froze, straining his eyes. Could it be Scout? He moved closer slowly, keeping his voice low, calling the dog's name gently. There was no response, but the movement had not been imagined. His heart pounded. John knew that in the desert, being cautious was as important as being brave. He continued carefully, following the small trail that seemed to lead deeper into the rocky area. As he progressed, John began to see more signs of life, not of animals but of someone who had passed through. Footprints that were not Scout's, and the occasional piece of torn fabric caught on a branch. John's curiosity and concern grew. Who could be here in the desert, far from any town or road? He quickened his pace slightly, scanning for more clues. Every instinct told him to be prepared for the unexpected. By late afternoon, John noticed that the tracks led into a small canyon. The walls of the canyon were steep, but the ground inside was relatively flat. Shadows were growing long and the air was cooler. He descended carefully, calling Scout again, his voice echoing off the rock walls. The canyon seemed quiet at first, but then he noticed a figure crouched near a patch of sparse vegetation. At first, he could not see clearly. It was just a shape, hunched and still. John approached slowly, keeping in mind that the figure might be in trouble or afraid. As he got closer, he realized it was a young woman, disoriented and clearly exhausted. Her clothes were worn and her hair was tangled with dust and leaves. John's heart leapt. She looked lost, possibly wandering the desert for days. He called out gently, trying not to startle her. "Hey there, are you okay?" The woman lifted her head slightly, her eyes wide with fear. She did not speak English clearly, but her gestures indicated she was lost. John kept his distance but offered a reassuring smile. He could see the relief in her eyes as she realized she was not alone. It was then that he noticed Scout at her side, tail wagging gently, as if guarding her and guiding her toward safety. The sight brought tears to John's eyes. Not only had Scout survived, but he had also found someone in need and stayed by her side. John carefully approached the woman, speaking slowly and calmly. She introduced herself as Aida, using gestures and broken words to communicate. She explained that she had been searching for a family heritage site deep in the desert and had become lost. Days had passed without water or proper food, and she was weak from exhaustion. John felt a surge of compassion. He had faced loneliness and hardship, but Aida's struggle was far more severe. Scout remained close to Aida, nudging her gently with his nose, comforting her and showing her that she was safe. John realized that his dog's instincts had not only kept him alive, but had guided him to someone who needed help just as much as he had. It was an incredible moment, one that filled John with awe and gratitude. The bond between humans and animals, he realized, could be extraordinary. John offered Aida water and a small snack he had brought for himself. She accepted gratefully, her hands trembling as she drank. Slowly, she regained some strength, and John guided her toward the safer paths out of the canyon. Scout stayed ahead, sniffing and leading the way, ensuring they avoided dangerous areas. It was clear that without Scout, Aida might have been lost for much longer. As they walked, John began to learn more about Aida's story. She had lost her husband and was carrying on her family's traditions, searching for the place that held her ancestors' memories. The desert had been unforgiving, but she had survived thanks to her resilience and, unexpectedly, to Scout's guidance. John listened carefully, feeling a sense of wonder at how life could bring people and animals together in the most surprising ways. By the time they returned to the ranch, the sun was setting. The sky was ablaze with colors, orange, pink, and purple blending into the horizon. The desert, which had seemed harsh and lonely, now felt alive with possibilities. Aida looked around in awe, realizing that she had found safety and help. Scout, as always, was by her side, tail wagging proudly, as if he knew the importance of what had just happened. John felt a mix of relief and joy. The day had started with worry and fear, but it ended with hope and connection. He knew that life on the ranch would never be the same. He had rescued Scout once again, and in the process, Scout had rescued Aida. The desert, which had seemed vast and empty, now held new meaning. It was a place where loyalty, courage, and compassion intersected, and where extraordinary moments could happen when least expected. That night, as the three of them sat by the porch under the desert stars, John reflected on the day's events. The wind whispered through the grass, Scout lay next to Aida, and the sky stretched endlessly above them. It was a quiet moment but filled with significance. Life had brought them together in a way that no one could have predicted, and John realized that this was only the beginning of a story that would change all of their lives forever. John Walker could hardly believe what had happened that afternoon. Scout had returned safely, but not alone. The golden retriever had led a lost woman, tired, weak, and frightened, straight to the ranch. John had seen many unexpected things in his life, but nothing as extraordinary as this. He had spent years in solitude, relying on Scout for companionship and comfort. Yet today, Scout had reminded him that life was full of surprises, and sometimes those surprises came in ways you could never imagine. Aida, the young woman Scout had guided, was still catching her breath. Her clothing was dusty and torn from her days wandering the desert, but her spirit had not broken. John could see the determination in her eyes, the same determination that had helped her survive in the harsh desert for days. He offered her a seat on the porch and gave her more water. She accepted quietly, nodding her head in gratitude. Scout sat nearby, ears perked, watching every movement as if ensuring Aida's safety. As the evening light softened, John realized that he needed to learn more about Aida. Communication was difficult at first. Her English was limited, and John's knowledge of her language was almost non-existent. But through gestures, expressions, and small words, they began to understand each other. She revealed that she was an Apache widow, carrying a heavy burden of grief and responsibility. Her husband had passed away, leaving her to continue the traditions of her family and to protect the sacred knowledge of her heritage. Aida had ventured into the desert to locate a family site that held historical and spiritual importance. She had wandered for days, surviving on little food and water, relying on her instincts to find her way. The desert had been unforgiving, full of dangers and obstacles. She had feared she might not survive, but somehow Scout had found her, guiding her to safety. John was amazed. The intelligence, loyalty, and courage of his dog had saved her life. The ranch, once quiet and lonely, was now filled with the soft sounds of life. The wind rustled through the grasses, the cattle lowed in the distance, and Scout padded around, checking on Aida repeatedly. John felt a sense of awe and gratitude. The bond between humans and animals, he realized, was more profound than he had ever imagined. Scout had not only returned to him, but had brought a stranger into his life, someone in need of help and protection. That night, as the desert sky turned deep blue and stars began to twinkle overhead, John reflected on the day's events. He had spent years in solitude, thinking that life on the ranch was simple and complete. But he now understood that life had a way of bringing unexpected connections when least expected. Scout had reminded him that loyalty and courage could lead to extraordinary outcomes. He was beginning to realize that Aida's arrival might change his life forever. Over the next few days, John focused on helping Aida recover from her ordeal. Her body was weak from dehydration and lack of food, but her spirit was resilient. John prepared meals for her, guided her to clean water, and made sure she rested properly. Scout remained a constant presence, lying next to her and providing comfort. The bond between the dog and Aida grew quickly, and John could see that Scout's presence had calmed her, giving her a sense of security she had not felt in days. Aida slowly began to regain her strength. She was careful with her movements, wary of her surroundings, but John noticed that she was also curious about the ranch. She watched the cattle, the open fields, and the small structures that made up the homestead. Her eyes lit up when Scout played nearby, chasing a ball or bounding across the fields. John realized that she had not had the chance to experience such freedom and safety for a long time, and he wanted to make sure she felt welcome. During these days, John learned more about her life and the traditions of her people. Aida spoke of her family, her husband, and the sacred sites she was trying to find. Though communication was challenging, John listened carefully, asking questions and using gestures to understand. He was fascinated by her stories, the history she carried, and the pride she had in her heritage. There was a quiet dignity about her, a strength that had carried her through the desert, and John found himself respecting and admiring her more with each passing day. Scout continued to play a special role in their connection. He seemed to understand the importance of Aida's presence, often guiding her gently or nudging her in the right direction when she needed help. John realized that the dog was not just a companion but a bridge between their worlds. Through Scout, Aida was able to feel safe and connected, and John found himself opening up in ways he had not in years. The ranch, once a place of solitude, was now filled with a sense of life, purpose, and shared responsibility. One afternoon, John took Aida to see the fields where the cattle grazed. She observed quietly, her eyes scanning the landscape, her mind perhaps wandering to thoughts of her lost husband and the family heritage she sought. Scout ran ahead, exploring the area, then returned to Aida's side as if to assure her that everything was okay. John watched them, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and connection. The desert, which had seemed harsh and isolating, had become a place of refuge, healing, and new beginnings. As the days passed, John and Aida developed a routine. He taught her small tasks around the ranch, from feeding the animals to checking fences, while she shared her knowledge of the land and the traditions she held dear. Communication improved as they spent more time together, finding ways to understand each other despite the language barrier. They laughed together when Scout performed playful antics, and they shared quiet moments of reflection under the endless desert sky. One evening, John and Aida sat by a small fire outside the ranch house. The stars were bright, and the air was cool. Scout lay between them, occasionally lifting his head to watch the surroundings. John reflected on how much his life had changed in just a few days. The loneliness that had defined his years on the ranch was slowly giving way to companionship, purpose, and the joy of helping someone in need. Aida, too, seemed more relaxed, her eyes softening as she spoke of her family and her journey. Through Scout's guidance, John realized that the desert was not just a place of isolation but also a place where bonds could be formed, trust could be earned, and lives could be saved. Aida's presence reminded him that there was still wonder and connection to be found in the world, even after years of solitude. Scout had been the spark, the catalyst that brought them together, and John felt a deep sense of gratitude for his loyal companion. John also began to notice small changes in himself. He felt more patient, more attentive, and more willing to embrace the unexpected. The fear and uncertainty of Scout's disappearance had been replaced with hope and determination. He had faced the unknown and emerged stronger, guided by love, loyalty, and the bond he shared with his dog. Aida had become a part of this transformation, and John realized that her presence was opening his heart in ways he had never imagined. Scout, ever observant, seemed to understand the significance of these moments. He would nuzzle Aida when she looked tired, bark gently to alert John if something needed attention, and always remain by her side. John often marveled at how the dog seemed almost human in his understanding of the situation. The connection between Scout and Aida was remarkable, and it deepened John's appreciation for the power of loyalty, instinct, and love. By the end of the week, Aida had regained much of her strength. She was able to walk longer distances, help with small tasks, and even smile more often. John noticed the relief and joy in her eyes, and it filled him with a sense of accomplishment and purpose. The ranch, once a place of quiet routine, had become a space of healing, trust, and companionship. The desert, which had been a place of danger, had now become a place of hope and new beginnings. As the sun set on another day, John, Aida, and Scout sat together on the porch. The sky was painted in hues of pink and orange, and the desert stretched endlessly before them. John looked at Scout, then at Aida, and realized how extraordinary life could be when loyalty, courage, and compassion came together. Scout had returned not only to him, but had brought a lost soul to safety. And in that moment, John understood that this was the start of something remarkable, a story of connection, trust, and the unexpected ways that life could change. Days passed, and life on John Walker's ranch began to take on a new rhythm. The once quiet and lonely ranch now felt alive. Aita, the young Apache widow, had regained much of her strength, and her presence brought a sense of warmth and purpose that John had not felt in years. Scout, ever loyal, continued to be the link between them, guiding Aida, providing comfort and bringing joy to their days. John could see how much Scout's actions had helped Aida recover, both physically and emotionally. With Aida's health improving, John decided it was time to help her begin the next part of her journey. She had been searching for a family heritage site, a sacred location in the desert that held the memories and traditions of her ancestors. John knew it would be dangerous for her to attempt the journey alone, so he offered to accompany her, both to guide and protect her. Aita agreed, her eyes filled with gratitude and trust, while Scout barked happily as if understanding the plan. Early the next morning, they set out together. The desert stretched endlessly before them, golden and harsh under the rising sun. John carried water, provisions, and a small first aid kit, while Ida brought a few personal belongings and small offerings for the sacred site she sought. Scout ran ahead, nose to the ground, guiding the way, but always returning to check on them. The journey was slow, careful, and deliberate, as John wanted to ensure Aida's safety and comfort. As they moved through the desert, John learned more about Aida's past. She spoke about her family, her late husband, and the traditions she carried forward. Her words were soft, sometimes broken but full of meaning. She told John that her people had always respected the land, the desert, and its creatures. Each story she shared was filled with reverence, wisdom, and a deep connection to nature. John listened intently, fascinated by her knowledge and humbled by the courage it had taken for her to survive alone in the desert for days. The journey was not easy. The desert, beautiful as it was, presented challenges at every turn. They had to cross rocky ridges, navigate narrow pathways, and avoid areas with steep cliffs. The heat of the sun was intense, and water was scarce. John could see Aida's determination, but he also noticed moments of fatigue and pain. He offered encouragement, helping her over rocks, sharing water, and reminding her to rest whenever needed. Scout remained by her side, his loyalty unwavering, often nudging her forward or stopping to make sure she was safe. Despite the hardships, the journey brought moments of wonder. The desert held unexpected beauty, wildflowers blooming in hidden crevices, the distant call of birds, and the dramatic play of light and shadow over the hills. Aida would pause to take in these sights, her eyes softening with admiration and respect. John noticed that these moments gave her strength, a quiet reminder of why she had undertaken this journey. Scout seemed to sense it too, occasionally stopping to observe the flowers or sniff the air, as if sharing in their appreciation of the world around them. As the day wore on, the trio faced their first real obstacle, a canyon with jagged rocks and steep drops. The path was narrow and treacherous, requiring careful steps. John led the way, showing Aida where to place her feet, while Scout scouted ahead. Aida moved cautiously, her trust in John and Scout giving her courage. At one point she slipped slightly, but John's steady hand and Scout's reassuring presence prevented a fall. The moment highlighted the bond forming between the three, built on trust, loyalty, and shared determination. During breaks, they shared small meals and sipped water, resting in the shade of rocks when possible. Aida spoke softly about her people's rituals and how the sacred site she sought held the history of generations. John listened, amazed at the depth of her knowledge and the respect she had for her heritage. He realized that this journey was not only physical but also spiritual, a way for Aida to connect with her ancestors and honor their memory. Scout seemed to understand the importance as well, remaining calm and protective, allowing Aida the space to reflect while guiding her along the safest paths. As night approached, they set up a small camp under a cluster of rocks. The sky was vast and filled with stars, and the desert grew quiet except for the soft rustle of the wind and the occasional distant howl of a coyote. Aida prepared a small offering to honor her ancestors, and John watched respectfully, learning about the traditions and the significance of the act. Scout lay nearby, his head resting on Aida's lap at times, providing warmth and companionship. The scene was peaceful, yet full of meaning, a moment of connection between past and present, human and animal. The following days continued in much the same way. They walked long distances, facing both challenges and moments of wonder. Aida grew stronger and more confident, guided by John's steady presence and Scout's unwavering loyalty. Together, they discovered hidden springs, small oases, and places where the desert revealed its quiet beauty. John began to feel a sense of pride and fulfillment. Helping Aida find what she had lost was a mission that gave his life new purpose. Along the journey, John also began to notice changes in himself. He was more patient, more attentive, and more willing to embrace the unexpected. Aida's determination and courage inspired him, reminding him that life could bring meaning and connection even after years of solitude. Scout's role as a guide and companion reinforced the lessons of loyalty, bravery, and empathy. John realized that the desert, which had once seemed empty and harsh, was actually a place of learning, growth, and unexpected connections. One afternoon, as they approached a series of hills, Scout stopped suddenly and sniffed the air intently. John and Aida followed his lead and discovered an old, narrow path partially hidden by rocks and shrubs. It was clear that the path had not been used in a long time, but Scout seemed certain it was the right direction. Aida's eyes lit up with recognition and she gestured excitedly, pointing toward the path. John understood that they were close to the sacred site she had been searching for. Their excitement was tempered by caution. The terrain ahead was steep, rocky, and potentially dangerous. John helped Aida carefully navigate the slopes, while Scout led the way, checking for hazards. Every step was deliberate, but with each one, their anticipation grew. The bond between them strengthened, built on trust, shared effort, and the knowledge that they were all working together toward a common goal. Finally, after hours of careful climbing, they reached a plateau that offered a breathtaking view. Below them was a small, secluded valley, dotted with ancient trees and natural formations that spoke of time long past. Aida's eyes filled with tears as she looked over the place. It was the sacred site, the heart of her family's heritage, the place she had searched for so long. Scout barked softly, as if celebrating with them, and John felt a profound sense of accomplishment and awe. Aida stepped forward reverently, her fingers tracing the outlines of the rocks and trees. She spoke softly, offering words of gratitude and prayer, honoring her ancestors and the land they had cherished. John stood back respectfully, understanding that this was a sacred moment for her. Scout remained close, sensing the significance of the moment, his presence a quiet reminder of the loyalty and courage that had brought them here together. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the valley, John felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been challenging, but it had been worth every step. Aida had found what she sought, and in the process, John had discovered the power of connection, trust, and shared purpose. Scout, ever faithful, had been the key to their success, guiding them safely and reminding them of the strength that comes from loyalty and love. That night, as they camped near the sacred site, John reflected on how much his life had changed in such a short time. The loneliness that had defined his days on the ranch had been replaced with companionship, purpose, and the joy of helping someone in need. Aida had found safety, guidance, and connection, and Scout had proven once again that his intelligence and loyalty could make a difference in the lives of others. The desert, once a place of danger and isolation, had become a place of learning, growth, and wonder. John realized that life could change in the most unexpected ways, that bonds could form in unlikely circumstances, and that courage, loyalty, and love could guide even the most difficult journeys. He knew that this was only the beginning of a story that would continue to bring hope, adventure, and connection to all of them. The journey back to the ranch was quieter, but no less meaningful. Aida walked with a calm determination, carrying the memories of the sacred site in her heart. Scout trotted beside her, ever watchful, occasionally stopping to sniff the air or check on her. John walked a few steps behind, his eyes scanning the desert and his thoughts reflecting on the incredible journey they had completed. The days spent in the harsh sun and over rough terrain had brought them closer together, and the bond between them felt unbreakable. Aida spoke less now, not because she had nothing to say, but because the weight of what she had experienced seemed to leave her in quiet reflection. She gestured to John, pointing toward certain hills and formations, sharing stories of her ancestors and how they had lived in the same land centuries ago. Though her words were few, John listened carefully, understanding the significance behind them. Each gesture and glance told a story of reverence, pride, and connection to the land. Scout seemed to understand as well, moving carefully and staying close, as if honoring the sacred history that surrounded them. The return journey also allowed John to reflect on his own life. For years he had lived in solitude, his days repetitive but peaceful. Yet he realized that he had been missing something fundamental, the power of connection. Aida's presence had reminded him of the joy that comes from sharing experiences with others, and Scout had shown him that loyalty and courage could lead to extraordinary outcomes. Together, the three of them had overcome the desert's challenges and discovered something far more valuable than they had expected: trust, friendship, and hope. As they neared the ranch, the familiar sights of fences, fields, and distant mountains appeared on the horizon. Aida paused for a moment, taking it all in. She smiled faintly, her expression softening. John noticed the relief in her eyes, a mix of gratitude and contentment. Scout barked once, a happy, playful sound, as if announcing that they had safely returned home. It was a small sound, but it carried a deep sense of meaning for all three of them. Back at the ranch, John prepared a warm meal for Aida. She accepted it with quiet appreciation, savoring each bite as though she had not eaten properly in days. Scout sat nearby, occasionally nudging her hand gently with his nose, encouraging her to feel at ease. John watched them both, a sense of fulfillment spreading through him. He realized that life had brought them together for a reason, and that the events of the past days had created a bond that would last far beyond this moment. Over the next few weeks, John and Aida settled into a routine. She helped with the cattle, learned to mend fences, and even assisted with small tasks around the ranch. Her determination and willingness to learn impressed John, and he found himself enjoying her company more with each passing day. Scout continued to be their constant companion, his presence a source of comfort, guidance, and joy. The ranch, once quiet and solitary, now felt alive with activity, laughter, and a sense of shared purpose. John also noticed changes in himself. He felt more patient and understanding, more willing to embrace the unexpected, and more appreciative of the small joys in life. Aida's presence reminded him that life was not just about survival, but about connection, compassion, and the bonds that could form between people and animals. Scout had been the catalyst for all of this, his loyalty and intelligence guiding them through the desert and into each other's lives. Aida shared more of her stories with John, recounting the traditions of her people and the memories of her family. She spoke of her late husband, the hardships she had faced, and the lessons she had learned from her ancestors. John listened attentively, fascinated by her strength, resilience, and wisdom. He realized that Aida's journey was more than a search for a sacred site. It was a journey of healing, understanding, and honoring the past. Scout, as always, remained by her side, his presence comforting and reassuring. One afternoon, they took Scout for a long walk through the fields surrounding the ranch. The sun was warm, the wind gentle, and the air was filled with the sounds of nature. John noticed how Aida's eyes lit up at the sight of birds, flowers, and the rolling landscape. Scout ran ahead, exploring with boundless energy, then returned to check on Aida, ensuring she was safe. It was a simple moment, but one filled with happiness, connection, and peace. John felt a sense of contentment that he had not experienced in years. Over time, John and Aida's friendship deepened. They began to rely on each other, not just for daily tasks, but for emotional support. Aida taught John about the history of her people, the importance of family and tradition, and the value of patience and respect for the land. John, in turn, shared his knowledge of ranching, the desert, and the ways of survival in harsh conditions. Together, they learned from each other, growing stronger as a team. Scout remained the heart of their relationship, his loyalty and love a constant reminder of the bond they all shared. John began to understand that life had a way of bringing people together when they needed it most. The loneliness he had once felt was replaced with companionship, purpose, and the joy of helping someone in need. Aida had found safety, guidance, and friendship, while John had discovered the beauty of connection, trust, and the power of loyalty. Scout had played the most important role of all, bringing them together and ensuring that they would both thrive in each other's company. As the weeks turned into months, the ranch became a place of harmony and happiness. Aida continued to explore her heritage, using the lessons she had learned from John and the experiences in the desert to guide her. John found joy in teaching and sharing, realizing that his life had been enriched in ways he could never have imagined. Scout remained ever vigilant, his golden fur shining in the sun, his eyes filled with intelligence and understanding. He was not just a dog, he was a friend, a guide, and a hero. One evening, as the sun set over the desert, painting the sky with brilliant oranges and pinks, John, Aida, and Scout sat together on the porch. The air was calm, the landscape quiet, and the sense of peace was profound. John reflected on the journey they had shared, the hardships, the discoveries, the moments of fear and hope. He realized that this experience had changed all of them, creating a bond that would endure for years to come. Aida reached out and gently touched Scout's head, her eyes soft and grateful. Scout leaned into her hand, his tail wagging slowly as if acknowledging her gratitude. John smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The desert, which had once seemed harsh and unforgiving, had become a place of connection, learning, and growth. Their journey had shown him that loyalty, courage, and love could overcome even the greatest challenges. As night fell and stars dotted the sky, John felt a sense of contentment that he had never known before. The ranch, once a place of solitude, was now a home filled with friendship, hope, and purpose. Aida had found safety and guidance, and he had found companionship and connection. Scout, the loyal dog who had led them through the desert, lay between them, the silent hero of their story. John knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but he also knew that with trust, loyalty, and the bonds they had formed, they could face anything together. The experiences of the past days and weeks had transformed their lives, creating a story of courage, resilience, and the extraordinary ways that life could bring people and animals together. In the quiet of the night, with the desert around them and Scout resting nearby, John realized that their lives had been forever changed. What had begun as a simple search for a lost dog had turned into an incredible journey of discovery, healing, and connection. Aida had found a safe place to rest and recover. John had discovered the power of trust and companionship, and Scout had proven that loyalty and courage could create miracles. From that day forward, life on the ranch continued, but it was never the same. Each day held the promise of adventure, the joy of shared experiences, and the comfort of knowing that together they could face anything. The ranch, the desert, and the lives of John, Ida, and Scout were forever intertwined, a testament to the power of loyalty, friendship, and the extraordinary ways that life can surprise us when we least expect it.